Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky, Passmore, and Stacy Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths. These badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacy's obsession. This podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Welcome to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time. We are the True Crime-ish podcast where we're talking about digital forensics and how they solve today's modern crimes. And we also talk about a little bit everything digital forensics. I am Stacy Eldridge, your co-host. And as always, I am joined by my co-host, Becky Passmore. Becky, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, we're going to talk about how tools don't solve cases, people do, which I know there's a lot of examiners out there that preach this all the time.
Yep.
We're going to say Briggs is probably that preacher of tools don't solve cases, people do. And it's pretty much because that digital forensic tool is just amplifiers of expertise, not substitutes for it. They're not trying. A tool only works as well as an examiner's understanding of data structures, the scope and the legal authority, the condition of the evidence. There's so many factors that can play into. And my favorite comment is, how much is this going to cost me?
Yes. Once you get out of like the law enforcement prosecution side of the house, people want to know, what's it going to cost? And sometimes when they're asking that question, and oftentimes you haven't even seen the evidence. So you're making a guess in the blind. And depending on who you're dealing with, how well they can explain what they have, what they need, and what's going on. There can be a great divide there. And I always find myself starting with I start low if they give me kind of a low thing. And it's like, but I don't know. We can start here and then we'll have to talk about it and we'll prioritize things. As you get deeper and deeper, I think the target moves.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say, what is the end goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Because we want to focus and prioritize. Because people say, buy the tool, it solves the case. And you and I have had that discussion about how expensive these tools are. Yep. And what is the benefit to having them? And the benefit to having them is it parses the data for us. It gives us the data structure. It gives us what is in the data. We don't need the tool to figure that out, but having a tool to help us do that does speed up time.
We're paying for the speed, right?
We're paying for the speed.
If I can do it faster manually, I don't want to pay for a tool then. If I can open it up in SQLite Viewer, something for the database, if I can open it up in Excel, because even with the expensive tools, you're still working in Excel a lot to solve your cases. But yeah, they've got to give me value as I'm doing it so I can work it faster and better and more accurate so I can pass that value in terms of cost savings onto my client.
That's correct. Right. Because the faster that tool processes the data, the scope may be very narrow, and that tool can produce those results pretty quickly. And then you've covered
Not
that
that we
scope.
get a charge for when the tool is running.
Oh, no.
We don't get a charge. Just to be clear for everybody, we're not charging when the tool is sitting there running and we're not sitting there. We charge for when we're working, looking, thinking,
when we're doing
writing.
The analysis of it, right? Get the data, download the data, process the data, and then we start to analyze the data. And that's what we're doing. Is so as soon as that tool, that's the thing. And many of these scopes they're time sensitive. Some of that information is needed pretty quickly. So a tool that parses something pretty fast, that we can go straight to the artifact that answers the question of the scope of what is the need of the end goal, then that helps us help our clients, our customers. So forensic success depends on those methodologies and not brand name tools.
Yep.
So why forensics tools work when they work? Why don't you talk about that, Stacy? Why do forensic tools work when they work?
The better question is, why don't they work when they don't work, right? It's two sides of the same coin.
That's
But the
exactly
biggest
right.
thing has to come down to the programming of the tool. There are people employed by the program, whatever program you're using, that are developing the things that are working in the background and digging through the tool or through the data. And then they also have to make the decision of how will that information be presented in the tool? What will it be categorized as? What will it look like? What are the different interactions? And then how can they make it work with their existing structure? Because, new technology comes along all the time. So how can they make this new widget fit into their software program? And so when we say the tool isn't working, we're saying we're not seeing some data in the tool presented to us either as we expect to see it, or maybe we're not seeing it at all, or maybe the way it's presented is confusing, convoluted, takes a lot of clicks to get there, that sort of stuff. So that's kind of, how we get to the tools working versus not working. If something's been around for a long time, we expect it to be clearly presented, easily to figure out. Great example is Word documents
That's right.
of things that consistently work. Emails, which I'll talk about more later. As long as these email has been around, it's a moving target because new software comes out, and email is always kind of a problem to a certain
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah. And tools are highly effective when file systems such as your NTFS, your FAT, your APF, all of those are well documented, right?
Yep.
And because, like what you were saying, you have these developers in the background, as long as the artifacts are living in the same spots all the time, every time a
Yep.
new update comes out, not a whole lot there to change. I'm sure a software developer would say, no, there's probably a lot more to change. And I would agree, they are an expert in their field. But what we're talking about is that if your same general artifacts that you are studying and analyzing for a specific case aren't being populated in different areas of the evidence, then why change the product? Why move it into a different bucket? Why put it into a different parsing tab on the dashboard? And so as long as file systems are well documented and stay the same, those tools are going to be highly effective. Even your open source tools. That's why there are so
Yep.
many open source community tools that are well tested and used, and actually more feedback given on those tools in the community. And it helps when those artifacts are stable and predictable within that standardized data structure where tools are highly effective. And that goes into MFT parsing, those browser SQLite databases, or
Yep.
your favorite, the iOS Knowledge C databases.
Yep. Yep.
So when the data behaves, the tool shines.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's
I would agree with that.
when that data is manipulated
Right.
by the user, by the system, by configurations, by a program, by an
Yep.
application, that's where it becomes unpredictable.
And, when you're getting those unpredictable results in the tool, whether it looks wonky or you can't find it parsed out, then you go to some other method to figure it out. Like if it's in a database, can you open it up externally in a database viewer and look at it that way? Or do you switch to another forensic, what it does when it parses it, and what does it look like? And then some other tools, when you are manually trying to search for something, say it didn't parse out, you've been told it exists, but it didn't parse out. So now you're trying to look for it and you're doing some searching your, keyword searching, but now you need to search against, the index of the case, or maybe you need to do what's referred to as a live search and different things. And you've got to know your tool for what terminology they use and how it will actually search for you too. But if you need to do that search where you're literally looking over every bit of the drive, are you looking for a hex pattern or what are you looking for? Some tools do that sort of manual hex searching better than other tools. And sometimes it's maybe the examiner knows this one tool better for doing this type of work versus this other tool for this other type of work. And that's fine too, because everybody has their strengths of, what they're great at examining and what tools they use. And naturally, the tools you use most often should become the tools that you become stronger in. But sometimes something doesn't work. So you've got to be able to flex and try to use a new tool. So you've got to be able to be a little bit well-rounded and have, some backups in your toolbox.
Mm.
And it's also important to phone a friend and be like, hey, have you seen this? I'm trying to do this. It didn't work in this tool, but now I'm trying to do it in this tool. I'm running into a roadblock. Can you walk me through how to do this one thing in this other tool that I don't use a whole lot?
I always say Mark Johnson is my hero in that one case where I knew nothing about NCASE, and he was the one that opened my eyes to, a different level of understanding of a tool by helping me navigate that case. And you're absolutely right. Phoning a friend, some people are very reserved about calling someone else up to ask them a question because they think that it might make them look like they don't know what they're doing. It might cause them to have some type of imposter syndrome, right? But again, how often do you look at iOS devices and the different models and versions, and how often do I look at them? And if I look at them once every 6 months, why wouldn't I call you to say, hey, I'm seeing something here that I don't know what this means. Has something changed, or is data being populated in a different dashboard, or where does this data live now? Because I'm very interested in finding something very specific. And again, it goes back to phone a friend, use your resources, network with people. Networking with people, I was working a case, I called Briggs, said, hey, Briggs, I need some help on something. And he answered the call and we had a great discussion and he sent me off in the right direction and I was right.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just like saying the problem out loud to someone else, and then all of a sudden the light just goes off, or you just talk through it and they ask you some questions about some stuff that you haven't thought of before.
Right. Right. Say you're working an insider threat case and all of a sudden you're really focused on looking for jump lists or shell bags, and someone says, hey, have you thought about looking in the registry hive for USB connections?
It can get you out of that tunnel vision.
Correct. And then you're like, and like you said, a light bulb goes on, and then you're like, I could go here and here and here and here, and I could do this and this and this and this. And again, it's that strategy and networking that helps keep the flow moving for these cases.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So then another part of why forensic tools work when they work is you can get it to some type of automation to a scale, right? A lot of logs. You got a large volume of logs that need to be processed. Automation, log using tools to grep those logs, looking for something very specific. That's a great way to get through that process using automation to a scale, being able to timeline that out and correlate your timelines, and also cross artifact indexing. You use tools like Zimmerman's tools.
Yep.
And you parse out all of your individual artifacts, your MFT, your jump list, your shell bags, your link files, all those, you use those tools to parse out all that data. And then you start to correlate those times. I mean, it looks beautiful when it's done. And now you're able to cross artifact those, indexing that information. And then you didn't necessarily have to use a tool to process it.
Yeah, you didn't need a big forensic suite that did
Yes.
like all the things.
Right, right. And you got to what you needed to get to. You met the scope, you moved through the process. You could go back and, like you said, verify through some other tools. But yeah, in contrast, manual analysis equals precision and tool assisted analysis equals feasibility.
Yep. And you've still got to know where all these artifacts come
Yeah.
from. Cause like you're mentioning jump lists and stuff like that. And so that reminds me of a case I worked just last month, I think. I had to go down to Harseville in Kansas City and review a suspected CSAM case. So CSAM, obviously I can't have that in my lab. So I got to go down there and review that stuff. So when I'm there, what I want to focus on is just the items that may be CSAM. But
Right.
then I want to be able to take the non CSAM stuff back to my lab that can help me determine, interaction with the files, how recent, where did these things, go to and from? Was there multiple devices? What is the connection between that frequency, stuff like that?
Attribution.
And yeah, so, I wanted to be able to I just exported those artifacts out of the forensic image, the ones that I needed. And then I put it in a folder on the Harseville system. And then when I was ready to go, they, checked it to make sure that I wasn't taking anything that I wasn't supposed to be taking. And then I took that stuff back to my lab and just processed those individual artifacts through a tool rather than sitting there and doing it for days and days. I mean,
Right.
everybody's super nice to work with when you go
Oh,
there
yeah.
and do that in that situation, but you're not in your lab and you've got to get all your tools loaded onto their stuff. And so, my philosophy is get in, get done what you have to get done there, and then go back home and finish it there.
Focus of within your tool, your lab, your structure. The good thing about tools when they work is they help us to known artifacts, known outputs, right? We know what those artifacts are, where they're going to live, what they're expected to look like, and at the same sense, what that known output is going to look like. Whenever I'm teaching my students, I say, we're going to use a couple of tools, and you'll see all these buckets on the side, whether we're using Celebrite UFED reader or we're using Autopsy or we're using Axiom. Those buckets are where that data lives, but that data is parsed by this tool. So we have to understand artifacts, outputs. Also, I would say the most compelling statement for tools when they work is if they're tested, they're validated, they're recognized in the community as a good resource for identifying artifacts and information, that its repeatability matters for court defensibility.
Yes, repeatability, super important. But speaking of court, what I've heard a lot, well, not a lot, I've just heard it. And, we've been reviewing trials, learning from them and getting ready to do podcasts on them. And one thing I've heard in some testimony that I've been listening to is the tool said this, the tool said that, the tool also said this other thing. And then there's been some discussion about that on LinkedIn. That's mostly where I hang out, and they're saying like, well, they said the tool said this. And I was like, I didn't know that tool knew how to talk. That's amazing. But we've got to be careful because you're pinning it all on the tool. So we've got to be careful when we're testifying on how we're explaining things.
That's right.
Because I think there were then some questions later on, probably on the cross. They're like, what do you mean that the tool said, so be prepared to explain it without saying the tool told me this. The tool said this. You've got to explain it as you were discovering and examining and reviewing that information because
And
you are the tool, as Briggs says.
right, you are the tool. And this is what I tell my students. When you are communicating and articulating your findings, I don't care what that tool said. I care what you say. Like, you're not allowed to write in your report what the tool said because you are telling me what you identified. You're putting the case together. based on the scenario, the investigation, what you've been asked to produce. And so the tool findings help you get to that answer.
Yep. And you just got to explain it all out in your report and then explain it all when you're in the hot seat in the courtroom.
That's exactly right. That's exactly. And then there's forensic tools fail and sometimes
Yes.
mislead.
Yes. Yes. That's where I've been living this week.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about when they fail and when they mislead. So the first thing that I want to talk about is email, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to go down the path of let's talk about some things specific about email attachments and the way I was seeing them in Axiom. So, if you're not familiar with Axiom, it has some different buckets, but you're mainly working in, well, at least I am, especially when you're starting the case, you're working in the Artifacts Explorer. And as it indicates, it has all of the different things that it's parsed out, divided out into different artifact categories. And then you can go through the navigation pane on the left. So it's quite easy to understand, like, emails would be in the email container in the navigation pane. Documents like text and Word documents would be in the documents container. So email has its own container and then it has sub things underneath there for the different types of emails like inbox and email X and just all the different
Right.
types.
Yep.
They also,
EML. Yep.
yep. And they also have artifact category of email attachments. So if it's an email attachment, it only lives in the email attachment artifact category.
That's
It
right.
does not live anywhere else, even if it is a picture, even if it is a Word document. So if you were looking for a document and it came in as an attachment and you didn't know it came in as an attachment, you're not going to see it in documents. You're only going to see it as email
Email
attachments
attachment. Right.
when you go there and look.
Right. And if they didn't create it on the computer, it got sent to them. Yeah.
Now, you can do a little bit better when it comes to pictures that are received and sent via email as attachments, because then you can switch to the Media Explorer to find the pictures. And it doesn't matter if they came in as an email attachment or they were stored on the computer hard drive or the device that you're examining. And it's not limited to just that email or just the hard drive. It will, whatever artifacts and images and extractions, whatever you have, anything that is a image, a picture will show up in the Media Explorer. So even if you had like a Google Takeout, all of that stuff, it will show up there in addition to the email attachments.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to kind of find the pictures there, one-stop shopping to look through all the pictures together there. But if you need to find a document, you're going to look through and you don't know what it's called, because obviously if you knew what it was called, you could just keyword search it. And then hopefully when you got the results of the keyword search, you would see like, oh, there's 4 things in email.
Right.
And 1 thing in documents. And that would be a quick look through with your eyeballs once it's, been filtered down with that keyword search. But if you don't know what it's called, obviously you could again try to keyword search with some words that might be in there. But again, how many things are going to come back? Now you're looking in 2 places for the unknown. So this is sort of my pet peeve. And the other thing is you might be thinking, oh, well, I'll just go to the file system explorer and look for the email attachments there, because I'll just keyword search over there or do a little more filtering by like the file extension and stuff like that over there. That doesn't work over there either, because most of the time the email is not living on the file system as an individual file.
No.
If they've exported out or saved it as like a .eml or .msg by themselves, then you would see it on the file system. But you've got to remember, all of these emails are being parsed out of whatever container it's living in and then shown to you as an artifact in the Artifact Explorer. And so that's the problem, because apparently something can't be two types of artifacts at the same time, because then it would live in two containers simultaneously. So I guess this is how the tool was developed. It can only be one artifact, and because it's an email attachment, it lives in the email attachment container. But then the problem is, well, what if you have a search warrant that says you can only view or search for Excel files? And so, you can see all of the Excel things if you go into that category. But what if you're not allowed to like look under email attachments, because they're like, well, you're looking through emails. You're not supposed to be looking through emails. You're only supposed to be looking at Excel files. So, I mean, you could certainly filter for the Excel file, but would you be going out of the scope of your search warrant by going into the email artifacts category and looking there? So I think that's a hard thing to work through, to try to find it, determining what your legal authority is, how far can you go, and what can you look in.
I would agree
So
with you on that.
I don't know how many people know that, paid attention to that. And maybe you found it, like figured it out when you were looking for something that was supposed to be there, but you couldn't find it.
Right.
And then you got to figure out why isn't it showing up here? It's not in here anywhere. Okay, now I'm looking through attachments, but why do I have to look through attachments? I just want to look through documents and find
right.
all of the documents there. And then, so say you're only allowed to look at the Excel files. So now you're going to go into attachments. How can you filter down to only look at the Excel files when you're in the attachments category to be effective? So you could certainly filter by extension. That
Yes.
would be an option.
Sure.
But it's not 100%, right? Because it could have
Change
the wrong
descriptions,
extension,
right?
no extension.
That's right.
Again, you could try to keyword search and use
Mhm.
like Excel, because the metadata tag of Microsoft Excel
That's
should
right.
be present.
Yep.
But again, it's just one of those weird things. You got to think differently about, how am I going to find this stuff? And it's harder to find stuff when you don't know exactly what it is. And it's even harder to find it if it's not there, because it's not there. And so you can't find it. But we've gone down this path a million times. Somebody swears it's there.
Yes.
It's on the drive.
Yes.
And so you start going through the problem.
Yeah.
Is it me?
Right.
Is it the tool? What is the
Right.
problem here?
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing, is sometimes it's easy to blame it on the tool. Well, the tool didn't parse it. Well, if you're an examiner, shouldn't you be able to parse it if it's there? Like, I know it's not always easy, because as we know, data is messy. It's not always clean. And going back to intact metadata. Is the metadata intact, and is it parsing it out properly? These tools assume that your metadata is intact, right? But the tools also assume every computer is clean when it shuts down. Like, it shuts down in a clean environment all the time. We know that doesn't happen. We also know that tools assume that there's non-corrupted structures. And we also know that's not the case either, right? People that are trying to hide their tracks, they are manipulating the data, whether that's the file system, the formatting, the data structure, whatever the case may be. We also think about real world evidence being power loss, partial overwrites, malware tampering, time stomping, right? All of these different things, those could resolve within the data, which means that it's messy, it's not clean. And then in the results, we get those false negatives that we're like, it should be here, and this is where it should be, and why is it not here? We get the false negatives, we get the incomplete timelines, and we get misleading confidence. It breaks down our confidence. And, when you spend hours and hours and hours looking at the data and thinking that it's exactly supposed to be in this area, why am I not finding it? It breaks us down and puts us through that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and part of it comes from things are just not clearly articulated to us to give us enough technical information about what it is, where it is. And then so we've got to make some assumptions that we operate under as well. And I think my assumption always is if I'm not finding it, the problem is me.
Right.
I'm the problem. What am I doing wrong? What am I
Right.
not finding? And so I will go through like 3 different tools trying to parse something. And, when that doesn't work, now I'm looking at stuff manually.
Yeah.
And so this leads me into another thing about the wonders that is email. Windows 10 is basically dead. You can still get some limited support, but basically since Windows 10 is dead, their free email app that came with it, Windows Mail, it's dead also. So it made everybody move over to Outlook New, not to be confused with Outlook Classic.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say old.
No, it's classic like us, Becky. We're classics. We're
That's
not
right.
old.
That's right.
But basically, Outlook New is like some half-baked version of Outlook Classic, because Outlook Classic is what you get when you use Microsoft 365 and you have a subscription for that. So the pain of Outlook New is that its default storage time for offline emails is 30 days. The max number of days you can get is 180 days. Now, the funny thing is, like, when you're online in the Outlook New app, you can basically like see them all and search because it's querying your online storage for the stuff that you're searching for.
Okay.
But then after you're disconnected, when you're offline, there's only 180 days worth of stuff stored in there. And it's not stored in like an OST or a PST or anything like that. This stuff is all stored in Outlook New in the level DBs. The other thing that comes with that choice of like if you switched it up to 180 days, you can also choose whether or not to include the attachments in your offline storage. Luckily, attachments are on by default from what I've seen. But the other thing that's problematic with this is this setting about, is it 30 days or 180 days? And what about the attachments is it does not live in the registry. It's stored in the cloud. So you can't just go into the registry and be like, oh, what do they have it set for?
Right.
So you could try to do some deductive reasoning, right? Like, when was this imaged? Oh, I'm only seeing emails going back 30 days. I suspect they have the default setting of 30 days. Or if it's going back 180 days-ish, you'd be like, I suspect it's at 180 days.
Mhm.
And then, so your default assumption is, if they have an email app on their computer, they've got everything downloaded and everything is there, but that's not the case. So, what can you do when you're in this situation if you have to produce something? And this could work whether, you're in a civil case or you're law enforcement trying to prosecute somebody. You're going to have to think about what to do to work through this to get these emails that you need. The other thing with Outlook New is you can't even open it without an internet connection. So, as a forensic examiner, sometimes we do, we make a copy of the image, we make a live boot and boot into the VM to look around. Well, that's not going to work because Outlook New won't open without the internet connection, which really irritates me to no end because some of us still live in the boonies and we don't always have internet. And then what if you're traveling? You should be able, in my opinion, to open your email and see what's in there. I don't think you should have to have an internet connection to just look at your emails. But again, so much of this stuff is in the cloud and it's really not like an app anymore, like the traditional app that we're used to. Everything's more just, it's really based in the browser. It just looks like an app. It's a different overlay. And this is kind of where we're getting into with Outlook New and especially with that level DB. So that totally explains why there's not the PST and why there's not so much living on your computer anymore. But, so this is where Microsoft is going. I guess they have this belief that everybody is on the internet all the time, easy connection, no problem. But I also had a case probably 3 months ago where I couldn't log into the laptop of my client unless it was connected to the internet. How stupid is that? You can't even log on. Again, what if you're in the boonies and you don't have an internet connection? Now, this was the fault of Windows Welcome and that nonsense. But the funny thing was, you could connect and change the Wi-Fi without being logged on. That's no problem. But that's just stupid on Microsoft's part.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
And it goes back to version drift and update risk, right? OS updates change artifacts constantly, right? Yep. Tools lag behind.
Always.
So now I promise you those tool vendors are doing some magic changes and trying to figure out the best way to populate and parse what you're referring to, right?
Yep.
Because they lag behind. There's new schemas that come out. There's new app behaviors like you were talking about. And then on top of that, there's new encryption methods.
Yep. Always. But I digress. So let's kind of go and work through what do we do with this email and kind of the path I went through. Sure. So, in law enforcement, it would be a different situation because like me, I could just contact my client and be like, what's your password? Let me in. And then so I could do the internet connection on the VM, open Outlook, enter their password. And then I could make that decision you do still have the option to export to a PST from Outlook New. So you could do that. Or you could just save down the .eml files that you specifically need if it's only a few. Another thing you could do would be to migrate their account to Outlook Classic, where it's going to download everything 100%. Another option is you could use a cloud collection tool for instance, where you could get all of their emails down from that cloud account. But again, you need the password and you'd probably have to work around getting in with the MFA. And so you'd have to work with a client. So that sort of stuff that I'm talking about, great for me working with clients either in defense or more of the civil lawsuits. But law enforcement, probably not going to have the legal authority to be logging in live to people's accounts and pulling down stuff. And they certainly can't compel or force someone to provide their password. So the alternative for the law enforcement is to go out and get a search warrant. And they could serve that search warrant to whatever the email provider is to get everything back. So then you're going to have to wait for that return as well. But so then the other problem is with Outlook New, some tools couldn't process it. And this was the other part of am I crazy? Is it me or is it the tool? Is it a combination of both things happening simultaneously? Because both things can be true at the same time, right?
Right.
So, and the reason I didn't think Axiom was working at all with Outlook New is I saw some emails and they look like what is a very technical term. It is called gobbledygook. They looked like gobbledygook. And I thought,
my favorite term.
Yes. I thought it's not parsing it out right. It's kind of here, but it's all smashed together and it's just not right. And so I'm like, okay, I'll throw it in another tool. I've been having really great luck with Fex Forensic Explorer lately. Yeah. So I threw those emails in there and is this the one that ran? It ran for 3 days on the email.
That was 53 million emails. And I'm like, I don't.
Yeah, because there was this ticker going through and it looked like it was going through 53 million emails. And I'm like, well, no wonder it's taking so long.
That's right.
And at the end of the day, all I got from Fex was a 300 gig log file with all the timestamps of when it was doing stuff. That's all that was in there and no emails.
Yeah.
So next I threw it into Autopsy. I just did the default install. So I don't know if there's another email module, but that default install didn't get it either. Also went to OS Forensics, didn't get it either. There are a couple of other things I had in mind, but part of the problem, I was like, the problem is that it's a level DB.
Okay.
So what's a level DB? It's it's, DB database, but it's
Right.
more of like a library
Okay.
that gets built into the applications rather than like running as a whole separate database. That's kind of, it's a little bit different. That's the best like
Analogy
layman's
you can
explain.
give. Sure.
And it's not even an analogy, but it's the best explanation I got at this moment. But the most important thing you need to know about the level DB is that everything works in key value pairs
Okay.
on the disk. So if you're familiar with working in a registry, it's kind of not that hard of a leap to kind of get your head wrapped around the level DBs. And when I was in training last year at IASIS, we did do some manually parsing of these key value pairs to work through it. So after I saw this gobbledygook, I thought, okay, it's just not parsing it right. I'm going to go use Rabbit Hole. Great program. You can literally go down the rabbit hole with Rabbit Hole.
Oh, I've not used Rabbit Hole. I got to check that out.
I love it. It's great. You
Is
can
it
get a
free?
30-day free trial.
Okay.
They're not paying us to say any of this stuff.
No.
But then after the 30 days, you got to pay for it. But it does a whole bunch of stuff. It's really great to kind of go dig down deeper and deeper. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to go look through this and level DB in Rabbit Hole to see if what's supposed to be there is in there somewhere.
Okay.
Like I needed to know, was it really there or not? And because it's in the key pairs and you have to piece all this stuff together, you can't just like search against the drive for the
Okay.
contents because it's not together in one spot. And so I was searching through Rabbit Hole, and of course I've still got to put stuff together, but I could at least see a chunk of data at a time, like, from subject header stuff to give me enough insight to lead me to believe that no, in fact, this email is not existing on here at all.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I've done all the things. It's not me. It's not the tool. It's just not there.
Right.
So Rabbit Hole was kind of my more manual work. And the last thing I did to be like, it's just not there. The other thing about Rabbit Hole is they have a great blog post of kind of how to work through getting out some of these emails manually. I didn't have to go that far, but they have like how you could rebuild it. So if you needed to understand how it worked at a deep level, you could go out there and get it.
Wow.
So at the end of the day, in this case, it wasn't a me problem. It wasn't a tool problem. It was an Outlook new problem. That's what the problem was.
The Outlook new problem. I like it. Again, going back to the tools lag behind the new schemas and how data is parsed and populated into these buckets and dashboards and findings, right? But the tools help us to validate and verify information for real courtroom reality, right? And going back to what you were saying is like you've used multiple tools to try and understand how the data structure is designed so that you could go down that rabbit hole, so that you could go find that information. Because in the end, we have to remember the tools are not self-authenticating. The courts care about methodology, validation, examiner competence.
Yep.
And that's what we have to. So when the tool said so, that's not testimony. Going back to what you said earlier, right?
Right.
And that is, going to get challenged in court. The reproducibility is the gold standard. Can I take what you did and repeat what you did and get the same result? Can I explain the artifact with screenshots? This is that gold standard they're looking for. The defense will attack the tool first.
They'll attack you personally first, probably, don't you think?
Right.
And then the tool.
Absolutely. So if the tool said, they're going to attack the tool, and then they're going to attack you as to why you're talking about the tool saying it did it. So the right way to think about tools is they are necessary, they're feasible, they're fallible, they're powerful when they're understood.
Yep.
Expertise lives between hex, metadata, and context. And it's
I was going to say expertise lives in the chair, Becky.
It lives in the chair. And it is not what the tool said. It's what the interpreter interprets, which is you and me and every other examiner out there. So
I was going to say the other thing, maybe some people already knew all this stuff. They do a ton of email cases and they've seen it evolve. I don't do a lot of Windows email cases. but I went down the steps to figure out, why am I not seeing what I'm seeing? I knew what I was looking for. I knew where it should be, checked all the places, tried all the tools, manually looked, and then eventually determined it wasn't there, and then went it around about another way to get that email, because it did exist. It was just somewhere else. It was in the
And it
cloud.
matters. It was in the cloud, and you don't always have access to the cloud. And it matters when you are trying to parse the truth. That's why
Yep.
we are parsing the truth one byte at a time, because when you are trying to parse out the truth, you have to understand. And so you had to go around and figure out what you were seeing and what was being displayed and how it was being read by the tool and through your knowledge. So absolutely, 100%. One skill, what is one skill every examiner should learn outside of tools?
Outside of, I don't know. What's your answer? Do you have a plan one?
How to communicate, right?
Yeah.
Like they should learn
How to
how to communicate. You being able to explain to our listeners about how you went about understanding what Windows Mail was and how you went about to go and figure out where the data lived, how the data was designed, what the data structure was, and now you've explained it to them. Someone out there has probably worked a case very similar and they don't know the answer to this, but you have provided some steps now that will lead them down the road to go, oh, let me go check that out and see if I can figure it out. So,
And there's probably somebody else out there that said, I knew this days after Outlook New came out.
Sure.
But lucky for them, you know.
And
It's
some
all
people probably
about
don't even
what
know
you
that
work.
some people probably don't even know that Outlook New is out there.
Yeah. It just depends
You
what you
know?
work. Yeah. And you
Sure.
don't know until you get it. That's the luck of the draw. So I guess, I think communication is a great skill. I think like being able to look at some of this stuff in like hex and being able to do some of that manual decoding and parsing and being able to trace down through things, so is going to help you troubleshoot.
Oh yeah.
I
I
don't
think
think that's
that's
like there's not like a class you can go to and get that skill. You've just got to build it up over time, and you build it from doing a bunch of different things. So like learning the basics of FAT and NTFS and how all that stuff works together, and what stuff looks like in hex, because eventually you'll be able to start to see patterns.
sure.
You might not know what this pattern means, but you're going to see it and you're going to be like, that's a pattern. So
Yep.
there's something about this pattern that's special. It's not getting parsed out. Maybe it's a new pattern. Let's dig into this and look at it.
Yeah. Again, that's why IASIS BCFE course is instrumental to those people to understand how to read the hex, how to read the data structure, how to read the file systems, how to read the MFT, how to carve it out manually, and then have an understanding, oh, this is how the tool does it. This is what the tool is parsing when it pulls it out of that location and puts it in to the dashboard and makes it pretty to read.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, great. Well, as always, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep parsing the truth one byte at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.